Hey everybody, it's Corbett and Grace from the Tiny Lab.
Hey y'all.
It's been a year and a half since we have lived in the world's highest performance tiny house on wheels. And we would like to remind you that we took this, first of all, we built it in southern Florida. We took it all over the country to all different climate zones, including Death Valley, where it was 100 degrees.
Uh-oh, Death Valley.
And this is the first season, now that it's been a year and a half, first season that we've actually had snow sitting on top of the Tiny Lab. So today it is freezing cold. It's not going to get above freezing. We're in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains here in Atlanta.
Happy snow day, since most of the country, or half of the country, is under snow right now.
Yeah, that's right. And there is a myth. You may have heard the word Hotlanta, which is a stupid word that doesn't mean anything because it gets hot everywhere. It's actually colder for longer in Atlanta than it is hot. So there's actually more what we call heating degree days than cooling degree days. You don't have to know what that means. Just know that this gets really cold in Atlanta, and in fact, we need heat more than we need cooling in general. So we're going to use this as an opportunity to give you an update.
Yeah, quick update. I am pregnant. I have not just been eating lots of pancakes and popovers, though I would really enjoy that.
And we'll show you where that baby is going to fit. We're going to be building a house right here where we're talking to you from, but that doesn't start until after the baby is born.
Yeah, so we'll be 400 and 200 square feet for a bit.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and show you what has changed, what we've had to modify, what maybe got a little bit hurt on the 13,000 mile trip around the country. First of all, you'll remember we have a solar system with a battery bank. The batteries, frankly, were so run down when we were using them around the country because we had our refrigerator and our toilet exhaust fan running 24/7 when we were on the road, actually. So we actually want to save the batteries as much as possible. We now use this system as a backup. That being said, these don't work if they have 2 inches of snow on them, so you need to remember to brush them off. This is another helpful thing of having them on the ground instead of having them up on the roof. I would have to actually get up on the roof to do this. Welcome back to the mechanical shed. This is the brains of our entire house, the Tiny Lab. We have in here the off-grid system, and now that we have the snow off of the solar panels, we are still bringing in no solar energy, and that's because our batteries are completely full of charge. So you're not really taking advantage of this. This is one of the downsides of an off-grid system. Frankly, our house uses so little electricity that it's not worth it to me to run down the batteries so many times by using the solar to offset the cost, because we run basically like $10 a month on electric bills. So we have in here also a space heater that I bought for $6 at a Goodwill. It is plugged into this little guy. It's called a Thermo Cube. You can get this at any big box store or online. It essentially is a power strip that turns itself on and off automatically based on temperature. So it turns itself on when the temperature goes down to 35 degrees. And then it'll turn itself off automatically when it's at 45 degrees, which is kind of cool. So I just plug this space heater into this, plug it into my system, and now I've got an automatic climate control just to make sure stuff in here does not freeze. That's the only thing I care about. I don't really care if there's what temperature specifically it is, as long as my water pipes in here don't freeze. One other thing that we had to do was we started getting a little bit of the composting toilet smell in the house, which I thought maybe meant that the little computer fan that runs that ventilation system at only about 2 or 3 CFM was running low, was starting to die. Nope, it totally crapped out. It was just totally dead. So there was no exhaust happening at all. So, which is weird because they're supposed to have about 30,000 hours of runtime, which continuously there's 8,760 hours in a year. So that should be like 3 or 4 years of time. It only lasted us a year and a half, which is okay with me. Cost $7 to go buy another one. So we went and did that. I then also insulated the exhaust duct as it comes into this. It's basically this hose right here is inside of this. This is the exhaust duct that's going from the toilet inside directly outside into this space. The problem is that if you've got warm, moist air coming from inside out into an unconditioned space that might only be, like I said, between 35 and 45 degrees in the wintertime, you're going to get condensation in there. And the condensation in there is going to be a little bit grosser than normal because it's coming out of the composting toilet. So it's nice and everything inside, but when you unplug it to reset your toilet, and if you don't know what that means, I'm happy to talk about it offline with you, but you'll get water coming out of it into your house. Not okay. So insulated here. Also, I have a bunch more of this because this trim right here on the other side of the house, I'm going to take this trim off and run, instead of having the exhaust dump out underneath the house right over at that corner, on the front right corner, I'm going to have it go up and through this trim and terminate out through the roof. And I have another whole fan that I'm going to put at the end of that line because, of course, when you introduce more longer duct, you're going to increase static pressure, which makes it harder for the fan to move air, and it might actually not move air at all at that point. So I've got now potentially 2 fans, and I will determine whether I need that second fan or not based on testing. You guessed it. So we will test it, find out if it's still pulling the right amount of air, at which point I can either install a second fan just to assist it and make sure that we definitely get all that flow out. But at that point, no one inside or outside will be able to smell anything that's happening in the bathroom, which will be a wonderful thing. And that's kind of an innovation that I had not thought about when we first built this place.
All right, before we get out of this cold and go inside, I need to fess up to 2 things that happened. If you've ever bumped your tiny house into something like a branch or a wall, it's okay. We've done it too. So we actually had to eventually replace the whole back strip that you see at the very top of the tiny lab after our trip to Charleston. At the very last, 200 feet as we're pulling into our destination, just this big tree finally ripped it off, destroyed it after the 13,000 miles of free branch trimming that we gave to everybody around the United States. And then the second thing, of course, again, as we are here back at our own home, we haven't bumped the tiny house into anything. And as we're doing the 3-point turn to get back into this space, we bumped the corner of the tiny house into the wall. So it wasn't really that big of a deal. You'll see right there's a little bit of indentation into the cedar. The plank shifted up just maybe ½ an inch. No big deal. We'll take care of it. But it happens, so forgive yourself and then move on. One other thing we had to do, because our tiny house is now staying put for a while, is we built a condensate line for the Mitsubishi. So you'll see the Mitsubishi actually has this PVC pipe that comes down and then it kind of meets up with a brick that keeps it in place as my toddler runs around the house and expels the condensate out into the yard. So that just keeps things nice and clean and dry around the tiny lab, and how we like it.
Inside the world's highest performance tiny house on wheels, and again, just in case didn't get the memo, this house was built to prove performance by somebody who's never built a house before. This house is the most scientifically superior house in all of America. What we're talking about is indefinite and total control over the invisible dynamics of air quality, moisture, airflows and pressure, and heat bleed. Even though the Proof is Possible tour is over, we are still getting contacted to help people tune the performance of their tiny spaces, whether they're tiny houses on wheels or small spaces in general. If you would like a curated interactive workshop online to be able to learn all that stuff, we have one called Home Performance for Tiny Spaces. You can get there by going to proofispossible.com. We also are happy to obviously consult on an hourly basis with people all over the world to help them to get control over these invisible dynamics. So with the 2 inches of snow outside, here's what we've got. First thing, when you step inside, we have, the front door is glass. We have a curtain that we can close this off, both to give us a better view of our Mattress over here and also to keep out the cold at night. We have a couple things here. This is a thermometer that is embedded inside of that duct. That duct is bringing in the fresh air from outside to the ERV that's parked in the mechanical shed that you saw a glimpse of a second ago, which is equalizing the pressures, equalizing the temperatures of the outgoing and incoming air and the humidity levels. And that air that's coming in on a day when it's below freezing is 54 degrees. That means that the ERV core, that energy recovery core, is working. Inside the wall, on the back side of the rock wool insulation, it's 44 degrees. It's nice and balmy in here. We've got, in fact, 74 degrees right here in the kitchen where we're standing, which means that the insulation is working very, very hard today. So all of these are metrics that we use to just judge how well the house is fighting what's going on outside. And that is what all houses are built to do ultimately, is to make an anchor that is separate from the weather. The weather is going to do what it wants to. It goes all over the place, humidity-wise, temperature-wise, wind-wise. We want a sacred interior space where you can keep your family nice and consistent all the time. Now this is our pressure readings. The top pressure is the pressure inside the ventilation duct. The supply is showing 0.04 inches of water column, or 10 pascals. You don't have to know what that means. It just shows me that the ventilation system is active and that I am getting fresh air coming in here, because air quality is the most important invisible dynamics to control. Second thing on this readout, it says 2 pascals, which right now is fluctuating between +2 and -2, and it's because there's a little bit of a breeze outside. That is the pressure inside the house with relationship to outside. We want that to be 0, hovering right around 0 all the time, because a house that is equalized pressure-wise with outside means it's not going to be sucking air into all the building cavities and causing condensation, or pushing warm, moist air out into the building cavities and causing condensation. Those happen in different seasons. Depending on where you are in the country, they can be dangerous under depressurized or pressurized scenarios. So in general, that's why you want an equalized ventilation system, not just using a bath fan 24 hours a day to just suck stale air out. Now, once we've gotten past these, we can come over here to the kitchen. We have one more metric. This is our range hood, which I love. This is a thermometer that is wrapped around a plumbing pipe that is inside of this cavity. And of course, the way that this works is we turn on the exhaust fan over the kitchen stove, which everyone should have, and it should always go outside. It's the only right way to do this, because we're creating carbon dioxide, moisture, all kinds of stuff that we just don't want in the house, and taking it outside. Now you'll hear that it gets somewhat loud. Come over here and check this out. Right now we're at -78. We're going to go just past -100 pascals. That's 2 blower door tests happening at the same time, at which point the hole underneath the stove starts opening up in the exterior wall, and we get down to about -10. And you can hear how quiet it's gotten. Now when this is happening, over here you can see that the temperature is going to start dropping on this plumbing that's inside of that cavity, because of course all this fresh air is coming out here. I can feel it a little bit on my feet. The idea is to create this little tiny feedback loop so that air is leaving through the exhaust hood and then immediately coming in right underneath here, and it's just going like this, so that I don't have to pull air in through my toilet, through the cracks and gaps in the enclosure, and I've got actually the fresh air that I need in order to equalize the pressure right here. Now, one thing that I would have changed if I thought about it, we were in such a hurry when we were installing this at the very end, is that I've got the pressure probe that's inside of this fan housing that tells the hole to open at the bottom of the wall. That's called a makeup air unit, is facing this way. So I've got it configured when it feels a positive pressure, it will open up the hole. What would have been better is to turn it around and say, when you feel a negative pressure, when air is going away from your opening, then you should turn on, because this is a cooking hood. And of course, there is grease going outside that is getting a little bit past my filters here. So this is getting a little bit clogged with grease, which means it takes it a little bit longer to recognize that there is a positive pressure. That's something that I'm going to have to fix later on, but basically turning that around would be what you want to do. Now, I told you that I had to change out the little tiny computer fan that was installed on my composting toilet's exhaust system. That toilet's exhaust system is superior to the exhaust system in your bathroom because air goes down into the toilet all the time. That's great. When I installed it, I have to then test it to make sure it actually is, number one, pushing air, and it's, number two, pushing air in the direction that I want it to go. You might be able to smell that, but I actually have heard stories from other tiny housers who had their toilet worked on, and then they found out after the fact that the fan was reinstalled backwards. It was actually pushing the composting toilet air back into the house. And that's the kind of thing that you can easily fix. This is called the CPS ABM 200. It's a little tiny air measurement device. It does all kinds of stuff. It measures volume of airflow, velocity. It also gets temperature, humidity, and even pressure. So what I'm going to do is really quick, let's test the toilet. Hold this up to the little port that's in the side of my toilet, and you can see that I've got a solid 2 to 3 CFM, and that's exactly what I want it to be. If you think about it, 2 or 3 cubic feet per minute going through this toilet to outside is kind of a lot. There's only 2,000 cubic feet of air inside this house at all. I don't need a whole lot of suction here. I just need air to constantly be moving that way. By the way, this is the litter box. This arrangement works perfectly. We have traveled 13,000 miles. We've been in this place for a year and a half. I only empty this litter box once a day, which for some cat owners is like, oh my gosh, how can you torture your cats like that? For some people, that sounds like a lot. But frankly, if the exhaust system is right next to this, then it works, and it actually draws air from the kitty litter box as well. The exhaust for this entire bathroom is up there in the corner of the shower, and I can tell you that we've had almost no problem with any mildew buildup. This thing is only pulling about 30 CFM constantly. 24 hours a day it works. So we don't bump it up when you take a shower. We happen to take Navy showers in here, which means we produce a lot less humidity inside the house than the experts thought that we would. And I consulted with all kinds of ventilation experts on this. We finally figured out that it's not an HRV that we needed, even though that's what everybody thought we needed. We need an ERV. If you need more information about that, go check out our other videos on ventilation.
Another thing that we did was we got a non-electric water filtration system. And this is really awesome because you could literally take water from a river and put it in there. We don't do that, but we're not constantly buying fresh water anymore or having to run to the store to go fill up our fresh water container, because the water that we put into our holding tank, which is underneath this, and it did leak back in Arizona. If you want to go check that video, and you'll see that we then installed in a water detector. But to keep our pipes and that bag clean, we do add a little bit of chlorine to it. Obviously, I don't want to be drinking chlorine, nor do I want my baby or my toddler or my husband to drink it, or my cats. So now we have this non-electric filtration system, which actually filters out the chlorine. There's a special thing for it, and it works like a charm. We really, really love it. The other thing, how do you have a toddler and now a baby coming into this house? So this is just a pack and play that we keep here. The curtain that you've seen us use will typically hide it. But at night, we just pull the curtain closed, set up the pack and play, and it actually fits perfectly here. We had a couple of those things happen without us planning it. And then back in our bedroom, which you maybe remember from the first video, is a little sleep area for a baby. We do also have a hammock, which is a little bit of a cradle that I can use during the day that I will be bringing back out. I am super pregnant. How is she getting up and out? It's really easy when you put in a handle. This has come in very handy, and especially as I get larger and larger. But it's been really easy, and squats are really great for pregnancy. One other thing that we have changed in this bedroom is we now have a high-end air mattress where we can actually change the different sizes of pressure, which is really, really great as you are expanding as a pregnant lady too. But the problem with having our foam mattress earlier is that it was just too dense and it almost provided too much insulation. So we did have some of that condensation buildup on the bottom. We did have a little bit of mildew that happened on the very bottom of our mattress. It also soaked up a lot of water when we did have that flood. So we have discovered that the air mattress has actually been a much easier product to work with. It provides little to no insulation on the floor, so it's cut down on that condensation issue, and we are not finding moisture on the bottom or any mildew.
Last thing to point out is we knew when we installed the Mitsubishi ductless mini split that we were going to potentially have some humidity control issues, which is what the ERV is really good at. In general, I'm always recommending to people to get ERV cores over HRVs, and it's because you get a buffer of temperature, so it kind of gives you a little bit of a break on the temperature of the incoming fresh air, and also gives you a buffer on the humidity. That's what an ERV does over an HRV. That buffer is incredibly important in all climate zones, in my opinion. In southern Florida, where we built, up the East Coast, right now on a freezing cold day, in Death Valley, everywhere, the ERV has served us. So just based on my experience, I'm just telling you, an ERV core does a better job of just buffering the environment in general, because temperature and humidity are very closely linked. That being said, this ductless mini split, and all ductless mini splits in general, as far as I know, have a very high what's called sensible latent split. That means that a vast majority of the energy that's being used by this in air conditioning mode is lowering the temperature, and only a tiny bit, in this case 5% of the energy, is used to dry the air. That is not enough in Atlanta. So we found out that we can do a much better job with this if we simply install a dehumidifier that is constantly monitoring the air, and if it gets over, let's say 40 or 50% is what we have it set to, it starts drying the air, and it's called a desiccant dehumidifier, which is good because it works at lower temperatures. We don't need that in here necessarily. It's just a little bit of a cleaner system. It needs to be emptied unless you pipe it like I did in the dry vault. And by the way, the dry vault right now is holding a nice and steady 50 degrees, even though it's not heated at all, which I love. Also inside this space, we have a dedicated humidifier. It's only this big. We had one that was only this big that ran off of a water bottle, but that didn't prove to be enough. So what we have been doing is we've got enough fresh air in here, frankly. We don't need 24 hours a day of 30 CFM run by the ERV. That actually changes out the air in this house about 24 times a day. Once an hour, we replace all the air inside the house. That's kind of unnecessary when it's this cold, this dry, and we're not generating as many pollutants when we sleep. So what I've been doing is we turn this on when we go to sleep, turn off the ERV so that we're not getting the stale air taken out, fresh air coming in, and then we let the house sit overnight. There is no problem with the air quality in here because we monitor it, obviously. But the ability to make it a little bit moisture when we're going to be staying in one place, breathing nonstop. That's our only activity at night, is breathing and trying to get some rest. So happy wife, happy life. I have found that it's incredibly important to have control over humidity. If it gets too dry, your wife's nose hurts. That's not good. If it gets too wet, that's also not good because you'll get condensation. Now, last thing that's just a real technical issue is there's two kinds of load that we had when we do the calculations on any size house. There's the design load and the actual average or daily load. The load is basically what your house is bleeding as far as heat or coolness, if you want to think about that in the summertime. That's why you have an HVAC system, is because of a load. The design load is the worst load you're going to have. That's built for this day. Today in Atlanta is what we built this house to be able to handle. So we installed that heating and cooling system, which is only a 6,000 BTU per hour unit to handle this. And this is basically the day that it proves itself. We're going to run 24 hours a day at a medium speed, medium to high speed, to try and handle this. We installed 4 inches of insulation in the walls. The 4 inches of insulation is going to make that thing work hard today. If we were to install 6 inches and build a 2x6 wall, that thing wouldn't have to work as hard. But we had to install that anyway because it's the smallest one they make in the world. So this is where that calculation about how do we design this house so that it's the most cost-effective, most energy-effective, and most elegantly designed house possible is we decided on 4 inches of insulation, which means, yeah, we have to run the heat a little bit more in the wintertime, but it's not going to run that thing dry. As you know, we're all only running about 300 watts right now. We saw the energy system out in the mechanical shed. So what I'm trying to get to is there is a very specific problem with small houses that you don't generally have in bigger houses. That is that we have walls that are designed so that we can have maximized floor space. You want 8.5 feet wide, which is what your max is, to be as much interior space as possible. That means that you make your walls as thin as possible. You're not going to go crazy and put, 8-inch or 10-inch walls on these things ever. But also, you're going to build in a lot of storage. On a day like today, when you have engineered this place so that the walls will handle the average load very, very well, and on a day when it's a design load day, that heating and cooling system works very hard, whether it's hot or cold, you will have condensation happening inside all of your storage units. So right now there is an exterior wall inside of this drawer system, and the temperature back here behind all of this stuff that is essentially insulation, and you can do the same thing in our closet. We've got lots of clothes stacked up in front of an exterior wall. Those clothes become insulation, is cooling down that back wall. So you will have those rear spaces inside your your multitude of storage spaces in a tiny house be wet. You will have condensation. That's why it's very important that when it's small, it's easy to clean. You need to get back into those places after you have a cold snap like this and just make sure that you wipe it down, that there's no mildew buildup or anything like that. But this is one of the things about tuning your home performance. You could build 10-inch walls and you wouldn't have a problem with that. Is it worth it? So this is kind of what you need to think about when you're planning a house of any size. What do you want it to do exactly? And what are the trade-offs? We've got some pros, some cons. So I hope that wasn't too technical for you, but there's all kinds of really interesting, elegant interactions that you have to think about if you're really going to design total and indefinite control over the invisible dynamics of your home. So thanks everybody for staying tuned and for watching our insane journey.
Stay posted because the TV show is moving into post-production, and that is super exciting, and we're going to have lots of updates coming up on that too.
Yeah, you can see that sizzle reel at homediagnosis.tv. See you next time.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.